And joining me now is Nomiki Konst, a journalist and activist, and running for New York City Public Advocate in the special election on February 26th. She'll be on the ballot line, Pay Folks More. All right, so we'll get into what that means. But before we get into your campaign and the planks of your platform, a little bit about your background. Who are you? What have you accomplished?
So, Ben, thanks for having me and for doing this show, because people are just realizing there's an election in a
few days.
It's coming up.
Yeah.
It's coming up. So my background, I've been a journalist. I was an investigative reporter. I started here in New York City working with someone so many New Yorkers know, Wayne Barrett. He kind of taught me the ropes. We didn't always agree on things, but he did teach me the ropes and how to follow the money. Eventually, it moved into different forms of investigative reporting. I've covered everything from the Flint water crisis. I spent much of the last year and a half in Puerto Rico following the money there and why resources haven't been allocated, and actually its connection here in New York City. I worked on the DNC following the money at the Democratic National Committee, why $2 billion exploded, was lit on fire, and the Democratic Party lost 1,200 seats. And of course, I followed the IDC here in New York. I was covering it pretty early on, realizing how big of a deal the IDC would be after Trump, and how the IDC was really funded by two industries, the charter schools and the real estate developers who've really held up our city.
And for some of that work on the DNC Reform Committee, you got a bit of attention, a bit of a progressive following. You have a large social media following, and that was around the fact that you were one of the voices speaking up about how the party was wasting money. Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I never thought in a million years that a clip about the budget of the Democratic Party on C-SPAN would go viral, but it did a couple of years ago. I was appointed to the Democratic Unity Reform Commission. 21 people appointed by Secretary Clinton, Senator Bernie Sanders, and Chairman Tom Perez went around the country and literally investigated what went wrong with the Democratic Party. How could the National Democratic Party become a stronger party, compete at the local level, improve the primaries and caucus process, and of course, which was my area, it was my committee, was the budget. The budget of the Democratic Party had never been transparent or approved. I literally had to go through hundreds of hours and look at the filings, reverse filings, as an investigative reporter does, and I learned that the majority of the money, almost 80% of the money, was going to 5 consultants in D.C., spending it on polls that didn't predict anything clearly, and media buys. It wasn't going to organizing folks in states, it wasn't going to take over state legislatures to fight the Koch brothers. It was going to some very greedy consultants' pocketbooks to buy their 5th, 6th, 7th houses, frankly.
And that's where, as you said, the Democratic Party has lost many seats around the country and sort of needed to reinvent itself to focus on every race, not just the presidential race or some congressional races. So let's fast forward now to this run for public advocate. Very crowded field, 17 candidates will be on the ballot. How have you tried to differentiate yourselves from those running? You come in as a bit of an outsider. There's a lot of elected officials in the field. How do you differentiate yourself?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating race, partly because this position, most folks I'm realizing when I go out in the streets and meet voters, either don't know it exists, which is a tragedy in my opinion, because it's there for them, or they just don't see the service in it anymore. The history of this office, brief history, is it really comes out of a series of corruption scandals involving the real estate industry and how the voices of average New Yorkers were not being really given the weight that other special interests had in New York City government. That's sort of the overview of it, more or less. And I think that this position, because of the design, was really not structured in a way that would be separate from the politics and be able to be a true watchdog. It's second in line to the mayor. That, I think, is why we have 16 people running, with 17 including myself. What differentiates me is, number one, I have taken on special interests. I've investigated city, state, and other forms of government over abroad and across the country. I've investigated political systems. We know here in New York, political systems get in the way of a lot, whether it's county committee or really just buying off politicians through donations. It's the watchdog of the city. It's the ombudsman of the city. I was actually an ombudswoman for the Democratic National Committee. I'm the only person who has. Now, in terms of the rest of the candidates, I'll be frank. There are 10 candidates who've made the debate stage. It was an arduous process. I don't agree with all of the process and how you get on that debate stage, but we made it. And we made it by not following these loopholes. A lot of people moved money from previous accounts. A lot of people had very powerful folks bundling $250 checks for them. Our average contribution is much lower than everybody else's. We have just about, I mean, we probably have the top number of contributors entirely in this race, and we're completely people funded. We're not taking corporate money, of course, we're not using loopholes, we're not taking lobbyist money, charter school money, and most importantly, we are not taking developer money. And we are the only campaign on stage that does not take developer money.
Why is that so bad? You've staked a lot of your campaign on this issue of the real estate industry, developer money. Why is that? What do you see as the ills of this industry? And what do you make of the folks in the industry who say, hold on a second, why this industry? Why aren't you talking about, there's a lot of special interests out there. Sure. Why just real estate? Well,
New York City is a real estate town. We know that. The land is expensive because there's not a lot of it. And in a city like New York, where people are being priced out of their homes, where their neighborhoods are being rezoned by our council members, this really comes down to life or death. We have the highest rate of income inequality in the country in the history of America. So right here in New York, the income inequality is so bad that people are being priced out, every year from the neighborhoods they grew up in. They're being kicked out of their apartments illegally. We all know there is a real estate crisis here. We have tenants' rights activists who've been, fighting at the state level for a very long time to make sure that we have the rights here in this city. But at the end of the day, when you look at our city council, when you look at our lawmakers in the Senate, many of the Senate, the IDC, that were holding up legislation, it was the real estate industry that was buying them off. So you can be progressive on 90% of the issues. You can be for some transformative issues here in New York City. But at the end of the day, if you're taking that developer money, you are not fighting for tenants who are being kicked out of their neighborhoods.
So what are those policies? So that's a little bit of your outline of the dangers of the money and the situation, but what are those policies, especially at a city level, that you want to see or you'd fight for as public advocate?
Well, I think, it's almost a whole new world now because we do have the Senate. For so long, the go-to was, well, we can't get anything done because we don't have, in Albany, we don't have the power. Well, I'm hoping, number one, that we as progressives in this city, and hopefully myself as public advocate, I will be able to lobby our Senate and our Assembly, of course, to make sure that they really fight for rent control in this year, which is up, right? We also need to be able to have our own control in this city. A lot of folks don't know that we're not controlling our rent laws. It's some upstate lawmakers because of some ancient designed, legislation that was funded by the real estate industry. I think, when you look at the infrastructure of our city and how it's in decay, we generate more wealth than anywhere else on the planet. The politicians keep, they're playing political football back and forth. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. Oh, we're going to increase fares on the subway. We're going to arrest kids for jumping turnstiles. Those are the solutions our leaders are giving us for not being able to fund the MTA. We have to privatize. We have to we have to go talk to Ben Carson at HUD to solve our housing crisis. We are out of money because we have not been taxing, number one, the deregulated real estate industry, who has been getting huge we're talking trillions of dollars in the last 35, 40 years in tax breaks to be able to develop all over the city. And then they give out candy like, oh, we'll put in a few units here for affordable housing. That's not going to solve this crisis. We have to take on the developers and make sure that they're taxed fully. They're investing here. They're not going to go anywhere else. New York is a very special place.
Real estate is one industry that can't really move, right?
Yeah,
it's based on land. So tax real estate transactions more or demand more from developers. What are some other planks of policies you'll be pushing? We should say, of course, as I do in other interviews like this, the public advocate can introduce legislation in the city council, but isn't exactly a policy-making office. You've acknowledged, ombudsperson, watchdog, et cetera. But you have a bully pulpit. You can introduce legislation. So what else? What else is on the Nomiki Konst agenda as public advocate?
A couple of years ago, the New York Times did this great expose. It was a several-part series about oligarchs buying up our apartments here in New York. Foreign oligarchs who ended up being pretty critical in the presidential race, as we know. These oligarchs have been using our real estate as their mini Cayman Islands. When you look around the city, when you look around Midtown, you'll see these high rises, these new buildings are beautiful. The lights are out. And partly that is because they're used as bank accounts and they're not being taxed. So that is, I think we need to institute a form of an oligarch tax for the real estate that's being purchased,
The idea
to house
of
their
if
money.
you're not really living there, you
Right.
pay an extra tax. Okay.
So that's one option. I mean, I think investigating, we do not talk enough about the investigative powers of this office. I was the first to call for the Department of Investigations to be housed within the Public Advocate's office. The Department of Investigations, of course, there was a recent scandal where Mayor de Blasio fired Mark Peters, who was a political donor of his. I mean, that alone.
Treasurer of his first campaign.
Treasurer of his first campaign, exactly. That's the kind of pay to play that really cripples our city. We see that happen here and there, but at the end of the day, you look at the MTA. There are real estate developers who do not live in New York City who are political appointees determining how our MTA functions. You have to wonder, what are they getting out of this? What are these high-profile political appointees who are running agencies, who are determining the livelihoods of 8 million New Yorkers? Why are they in these positions of power rather than tenants' rights activists? So I would like to do more investigative work. We talk about the limited budget of the office. This is really interesting. The highest paid person on the salary of New York is a loan shark. They make over $7 million. There was a story about a month and a half ago about this loan shark basically collecting money for the city and for banks. But the office that's supposed to represent the most marginalized communities of New York has a $3.4 million budget. And it has, it's supposed to represent everybody.
Citywide office, yeah.
Just shows you where our priorities are. But one thing I will say about the office is, yes, it should have subpoena power, but we can't use that as an excuse for not doing the work. I was an investigative reporter. You're a reporter. I'm going to guess you don't have a $3.5 million budget.
No, that would be nice. That would be, yeah.
But you do critical work. You know where to look. You were trained how to look for the inconsistencies, the corruption, following the money. It really does take somebody who knows how to do that. I think decentralizing this office and making sure that there are trained public advocates in every neighborhood, there in every city council district, kind of working alongside community board members, making sure that they know what's happening on the ground, because no one person in City Hall can know what's happening in every single neighborhood of New York. And unfortunately, even though our city council should be more responsive to the concerns and needs of their constituents, that's not always the case.
So we've got just a few more minutes,
Sure.
couple last questions. You are facing in this race several sitting elected officials, state assembly, city council, people that are making an argument about, I've been in government, I know government, I deserve, the next step up because of things I've accomplished in government, and I can therefore be even more successful in government. Do you have a counter argument to that? You're one of the few people who has made the debate stage or even just the ballot who is not an elected official. Should voters be concerned that you don't have that type of government experience?
This is the watchdog position. This isn't the next in line for the next political position. Every time there's an open seat, everybody who's in their office, termed out, sick of going to Albany, looking for their next step up, they start clamming. And all the consultants, this is the system, right? All the consultants start calling them up and saying, you really have a shot at this race. Maybe you should go out there and see if you can raise matching funds. You could raise $1 million. And of course, that helps the consultant class. I think what we need to keep in mind here is this is not a political position. This is a position that is supposed to oversee our government, to make sure our elected officials are doing their jobs, to make sure that the agencies are doing their jobs. If they were so good at what they were doing, then why do they want to leave their positions and go to the watchdog position? I think it's going to be very hard for city council members, a former city council speaker, to suddenly be able to check their own work that they have done. I think it's going to be very hard for people in the assembly who really have for the most part, very little city, local city experience. They go to Albany, they fight in Albany. That's a great work. But this is not a bully pulpit position. This is an ombudsman position. We have to know the difference that's literally written in the charter. Investigations are critical. Who has done investigative work? Who is independent of politics and political machines? And frankly, the positions that they're supposed to keep in line.
Final minute here. One of the key jobs, obviously, is holding the mayor accountable. That is where maybe the bully pulpit comes in a little bit. But what's your assessment of Mayor de Blasio? Are there areas where you think he's way off track? Anything you want to say you agree with him on? We've got about 30 seconds on that.
I think that he needs to separate himself from the real estate class. If you're really a Bernie Sanders progressive, as I am, I saw him in Vermont fighting for issues. He needs to separate himself from Amazon. kill the deal. The deal has to end. It's an embarrassment. It was a real estate deal before it was an Amazon tax break for Jeff Bezos. So kill the deal with Amazon, separate yourself from the real estate class, take them on, and you have to reform the criminal justice system. He is just, frankly, it's an embarrassment that New York City is still not.
What's an example in criminal justice where the mayor should do more or should do something different?
We have to reform the CCRB. It's
Civilian Complaint Review Board, oversight of the NYPD,
Exactly.
civilian. So change that to give it more teeth, more strength.
We have to prosecute killers. I mean, there are literally officers right now who have killed people and they're still on staff. They still are receiving benefits. They haven't been fully investigated. They haven't been prosecuted. We have to prosecute people who do bad things.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for a good discussion, and we'll be watching you on the campaign trail.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Appreciate it.